Hey everyone, welcome back to Nuanced with Kaizen. I'm Kaizen. This is Nuanced. Let's get into it. So it's been a pretty full weekend of both domestic and international affairs. And before I get into this, I want to actually just be honest with you guys. Lately, I've been feeling kind of burnt out talking about politics because it just feels like there is so much confusion and so much tribalism and so much emotion that it honestly becomes very demotivating and discouraging sometimes to try to break these things down, because it feels like day after day we have Trump accusing the Democrats of one thing and the Democrats accusing Trump of another thing, and the pro-Israel lobby accusing the pro-Palestinian lobby of being Hamas sympathizers, and the pro-Palestinian lobby accusing the Israelis of being pro-genocide. And the level of extremism and the quality of discourse are respectively so high and so low, it makes all of this incredibly exhausting. And honestly, before today's show, I was like, is there even a point to talking about this kind of stuff? Like, is it actually even making a dent in the culture to just try to understand both sides, try to offer a view on what I think is right based on basic human intuitions? And honestly, sometimes I'm not so sure. But I'm here anyway because there's a part of me that just wants to believe that even if it's just a few of us speaking in a way that's not about polarization and what tribe and calling people names, maybe we can actually get somewhere. But I just wanted to get that off my chest because, honestly, going into these shows, honestly, I'm not even sure why I do the live stream. Like, I make no money off of it. I don't get that much viewership compared to me making like a short form reel. And I think I just do it because this is like, it's almost like a training ground for me. Like, it's a place to just practice trying to think through stuff out loud. And the real point isn't to assert my point of view on the world, but rather to help elevate how we all think about this stuff. And I'm actually curious why you guys watch. Yeah, some of you tune in every week, sometimes every day to watch me, and I'm flattered. But sometimes I'm not even sure, like, why you don't go watch someone else, because it's honestly so seductive sometimes to see, people like, we're going to talk about this Tulsi Gabbard thing with Obama. And I see other accounts on X, and it's like people are just so incredibly confident in their super simple view of reality, where it's just good guys versus bad guys. And I guess I just don't feel that way. And I just wonder, like, am I the one who's missing something? Like, am I just being a coward who's afraid to just say this side is right and this side is wrong all the time? Like, maybe this whole nuance thing is it's just a veneer for cowardice. I honestly, sometimes I wonder, and then I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure most of America is not locked into red or blue or left or right or Israel or Palestine or Ukraine or Russia. I don't think most people in America feel super strong ideological convictions in either direction. And I suspect there's like a silent majority of people who are just like really, excuse my French, we're going to curse a bit today because I just got to, really fucking tired of all the fighting. Just people who are just really fucking tired. Like, can we just figure out how to be decent to one another? Can we just recognize, yeah, we have differences. No, it doesn't mean that some of us are angels and the other of us are demons. And yeah, sometimes I wonder, am I crazy or is the world crazy? Or are we both crazy? Or we're just playing off each other's crazy? Seriously. So yeah, I'm gonna, do my best to, again, always like understand both sides, do that without fence sitting, like give you guys an actual take. But I'm just genuinely frustrated with the lack of, it's not even just critical thinking and lack of clear thought, just the lack of good faith in conversations. It's like everyone is assuming bad faith and acting in bad faith at the same time. One of the things that pissed me off was I saw this New York Times headline. And this New York Times headline was about, maybe I can just find the headline. Let's see. Great. Okay. You know what? I'm going to try something. We're just going to freestyle a little bit today, guys, because, Yeah, I've honestly hit kind of a breaking point with some of this stuff. So we're just going to do a whole bunch of unplanned stuff. I want to show you this. Okay. So I see this headline. It's from the New York Times. New York Times says, breaking news. Israeli troops killed more than 60 Palestinians after crowds gathered near a border crossing where aid trucks enter, Gaza officials said, right? And, you know, we used to exist in a reality where you would just see the headline and you'd be able to just trust that, yes, everything said in there was factual. Now you can have different beliefs about who is right or wrong in the situation, but we were just able to believe that, yes, okay, if New York Times is saying this, then 60 Palestinians were killed, and it was after Israeli troops fired upon them, right? And then you go to the comments. Still peddling without question or corroboration the Hamas narrative. Right? So this person is not actually making an argument. They're just saying, essentially, that Gaza officials are Hamas, and therefore you can't believe anything. And it's like, okay, maybe you think the New York Times is just a liberal propaganda rag. Sure. Maybe you believe that Gaza officials are just a Hamas mouthpiece. Okay. Do you believe the question is not necessarily just is this headline true, but to what extent is it true? Do we think everything here is made up? Do we think the Israeli troops didn't fire and no one died and there were not Palestinians trying to get food when they were fired upon? No, there's probably some truth to this, but instead we get this, it's always extreme polarization. Rather than one side being able to acknowledge the degree of factualness of what the other side is saying, it's just a complete dismissal every time. And it's like, I see comments like this, and it's like, okay, well, is there going to be any acknowledgement of the fact that there's a humanitarian crisis going on in Gaza right now? And even if you think Israel's doing the right thing, there's still reason to question whether they're doing the right thing in the wrong way. Like, can we even have a conversation about that? Or is everything that's associated with Gaza and the Gaza Health Ministry a Hamas narrative? And it goes in the other direction too. It's like, if every time Israel says, hey, this is an extremist organization and we're trying to defend ourselves and these people will literally wipe us off the face of the earth if they get the chance to, are we just going to call them genocidal maniacs every time? Like, is there any validity to the claim of the Israeli government that, yes, they are in an existential fight for life and death that they've been going through for 3/4 of a century now? So it's like there's just a bad faith assumption of everything, and bad faith ruins everything. Because if you assume bad faith, it's impossible to coordinate, and the only solution is to dominate the other side. So I guess while we're here, I actually planned on talking about the Tulsi Gabbard thing first. But while we're here, let's talk about this thing. Because here's what actually happened. Here's what we know for sure. I'm going to take this down for a second here. And yes, I know the source is not neutral. There's no such thing as a neutral source. So unfortunately, we're in this really fractured reality where we have to read multiple articles on every single headline to try to approximate the truth and then apply our own clear thinking. I know New York Times is not a neutral source. There is no such thing as a neutral source. I'm saying it's a source with a degree of truth in it. So let's try to filter down and get down to the ground truth. Okay. So here's what I understand happened. Large crowds gathered around aid trucks and distribution hubs in northern Gaza. And those crowds of people were starving Palestinians who are hoping to receive food. Now, the Israeli camp will argue, well, the reason why these people are starving is because we try to allow food into the region, Hamas takes control of those food supplies. They hoard the food, they jack up the prices, and then they resell that jacked up price food to their own populace, or they basically ransom that food in exchange for people joining Hamas, right? So that's what the pro-Israel camp will argue. The pro-Palestine camp will argue, well, you've shut down their ability to domestically produce the kind of food and at the volume that they need to actually feed themselves. That's why there's a humanitarian crisis, and Israel limiting the amount of food coming into the region is only contributing to the humanitarian crisis. Okay, what I think is the truth is, as usual, somewhere in the middle. And when I say it's somewhere in the middle, it doesn't mean it's exactly in the middle. But has Hamas been siphoning off some of that food and withholding it from their own population and reselling it to their own population for exorbitant prices and taking that food and using it as a reason to recruit people? Of course. The question is, to what degree is this being done? Is it 9 out of 10 bushels of wheat? I don't even know if wheat comes in bushels. Is it 90% of the food, 60% of the food, 50% of the food? Right? So some amount of the food is definitely being taken by Hamas, but me personally, I suspect it's not all of it. And then the question would be, okay, well, if Hamas is taking food, you have two choices. You can either try to control and limit the food supply so that Hamas doesn't get any of the food, like what they're trying to do right now, or you could flood the zone with so much food that even if Hamas gets 50% of the food, there's still enough food left over for the rest of the Palestinian people. Because at the end of the day, Hamas needs to be eliminated, but there's also 2 million people in Gaza right now who are starving to death. They realize, some of them realize they're getting abused by Hamas, by the way. Like, not all of them support Hamas, but I think the majority of them at this point, I have to check the most recent survey, do support Hamas, but some of them, they have been protests against Hamas in Gaza. But as you starve this population of civilians with the justification being, well, we don't want to empower Hamas, Hamas is getting more future recruits because the people who are starving are going to be like, okay, well, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And that's my concern with the dealing with the management of this entire Israel-Palestine situation. Hamas is not just a group of guys, it's an ideology. And the ideology grows with resentment. And treating civilians in a way where they need to crowd around civilian checkpoints to get food, and then fire is being opened on them when it becomes chaotic. And how can it not become chaotic, right? Because a bunch of starving people trying to get food. Yes, within that group of starving people, especially the young kids, is the future of Hamas. It's a future of extremists who say, yeah, you know what? I remember what the Israeli government put us through. I'm willing to sign up my life for sacrifice to be a suicide bomber or a terrorist or someone who's going to repeat October 7th. So I don't dispute at all that Hamas is a huge problem. And in fact, I've made videos saying Hamas is a huge problem. And I don't think the pro-Palestine camp seems to understand, or sorry, that's not fair. I think there are elements of the pro-Palestine camp who don't seem to understand that you don't have a free Gaza without Hamas being removed. But I also think that some of the pro-Israel camp doesn't realize some of the things that they're doing are self-defeating. And it's actually just creating fertile ground for more terrorists who hate your country and will do anything that they can to eliminate you. So anyway, according to Gaza's health ministry, and understanding that that is controlled by Hamas, Israeli forces opened fire upon those crowds, reportedly killing 80 to 93 people and injuring many more. Now, people have said that the Gaza health ministry is controlled by Hamas, so we can't trust their numbers. That said, Israeli forces have not disputed that they opened fire. What they're disputing is the number of people killed and who they were opening fire upon. They claim that some of the people who they had to open fire upon, they were firing warning shots because some of those people were acting erratically, and it was within their protocol to defend themselves in that situation. I believe that there are some people who were acting chaotic in that crowd and were a threat to Israeli defense force. Of course, I'm sure it's an incredibly chaotic situation. It's 2 years of this going on right now. Of course, you're going to have chaotic situations. So the question is, how do we stop creating chaotic situations? And this is my concern. 2 years, a year and a half since October 7th. What is the path after bombing Gaza? Look, I'm open to the argument that Israel, they needed to defend themselves. Overwhelming military response was absolutely needed. And they have dismantled a lot of Hamas's infrastructure. As I understand it, Hamas is they're limping on one foot. They barely are surviving in the region. So I'm open to the idea that Israel, they needed to assert a boundary. And a year and a half later, it's just not clear to me that there's any long-term plan for not just how they're going to dismantle Hamas. They've made it very clear that they want the hostages to return, and they want to dismantle the military infrastructure of Hamas, and they don't want Hamas running the region. But how are you going to make sure that you don't have 2 million people who are having kids who are raised to hate you after what's been done for the last year and a half? That's the thing with politicians. It feels like so often the view is short-sighted, and they get into demagoguery and polemics that just say it's just like, we're 100% right, they're 100% wrong. Anything is right in our crusade to defend our people. when actually they end up doing things that end up long-term jeopardizing the safety of their own people. And incidences like this is like, yeah, if you're a little kid in Gaza and you saw this happening, you're not thinking, oh, well, yeah, there were some people in the crowd who were behaving erratically. And of course, IDF needed to defend themselves against those people who are behaving erratically. No, you just saw men with guns open fire on women and children and other men who didn't have guns. And we can dispute whether it was 80 people or 50 people or 10 people. But on a human level, it just doesn't matter to a lot of people. So anyway, the Israeli military did confirm that shots were fired, but they say that they were warning shots aimed at dispersing people who allegedly pose a security threat. And they dispute the Gazan casualty figures, and they insisted the troops only targeted armed or menacing individuals. I don't know, man. There's a lot of entropy in situations like that. Do I believe that they wanted to only target menacing or armed individuals? Sure. But when there's hundreds or thousands of people clamoring for aid, the moment a shot goes off, it becomes a very difficult situation to manage. And I don't see how they can say with confidence that they only fired upon people who were armed or menacing individuals. So again, it's like, do we need to take the Gaza Health Ministry's numbers for granted? Of course not. Do we need to take the New York Times reporting on it for granted? Of course not. But should we take the Israeli Defense Forces reporting for granted on it? For granted? Of course not. Like, let's just think about what the situation has to be by this point. Now, I understand war is hell. War is chaos. There's never been such a thing as a perfect army who perfectly executes. I don't think a standard that the IDF should be held to is perfection. But I would like to see something constructive, because what I see is every week more headlines about this stuff, more headlines about how Gaza is on the brink of famine, more headlines about how a hospital needs to be evacuated, or newly they're bringing tanks into a previously untouched area of Gaza and telling people to evacuate. And it doesn't appear that there's a real end in sight. And some people say, well, Hamas is doing this by holding the hostages. Well, if you're an extremist and you know that you're outgunned and outmanned, of course you're going to hold on to hostages. So the real solution is the Palestinian people need to be recruited into an effort to cast off the yoke of Hamas themselves, which is really difficult because a lot of these people are radicalized and they have been brainwashed by Hamas. And yet that's the only thing that's going to create long-term peace in this situation. The Israeli government needs to create a situation that is so good for the Palestinian people that they would never want to adopt extremism again. Because otherwise, in another 10, 15, 20 years, we're going to see the same thing happen again in Gaza. The same thing. And when you look at this insane mortal pendulum swing back and forth, since the founding of Israel, by the way, it makes total sense why there's elements in the Israeli government who are probably, definitely pushing for ethnic cleansing of the region, who are definitely saying, hey, you know what? We can't even deal with these Gazan people. Let's just raise the whole region and make it uninhabitable. I do believe there are elements of the Israeli government who want that. I'm not saying it's the whole government, because I recognize Israel's a democracy. Just like America, we have left and right. They have far right, they have far left. There are elements of their government. I'm not saying it's the whole government. But I'm concerned about extremism on both sides at this point. I'm concerned that the Israeli government is trying to fight monsters and in the process becoming monsters themselves. I'm concerned that the Israeli government doesn't even believe peace is possible and they've given up on the whole endeavor. So yeah, when I see stuff like this, it becomes very frustrating, because rather than having this kind of discussion where we're trying to understand the perspectives of both camps, and trying to find a way to thread the needle so that, yeah, we're not going to find a perfect solution, but at least we can have a solution where 2 million people are not on the brink of starvation. It's just like discount any evidence that goes against your camp and believe any evidence that's in support of your camp. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. So let's look at the big picture here, okay? Hamas started this war on October 7th. And there's a bunch of history preceding that. But this particular conflict was started by Hamas on October 7th, where they killed 1,200 people. And now 59,000 Palestinians are dead. I suspect many more will die by the end of this crisis. Some of that death was inevitable. As cold as it sounds, some of that death was inevitable because there's so much chaos, so much entropy, so much trauma, so much resentment on both sides that, yeah, blood had to be spilled. What's the plan going forward? Because I'm not hearing one. I'm not seeing one. And it's incumbent on, I mean, I think the reason I care about this as an American is because, yeah, my tax money is going there, but I also just care as a human being. This is insane. This is insanity. And every time I hear people talk about it, it's like people, like the people who are criticizing Israel get accused of being anti-Semites, and the people who criticize Hamas get accused of being pro-genocide. It's so stupid, guys. So, yeah, look, what I'd like to see at this point is Israel is like, Hamas is not a direct threat to you right now. They've been bludgeoned into the ground for the year and a half. Like, bravo, well done. Like, the military deterrent has been firmly established. I do think Hamas will be a threat in the future, but right now there's not an immediate threat. So, like, can we talk about a plan that actually creates a situation where the Palestinian people are governed by a multi-Arab nation coalition, not Hamas? It could be a combination of Jordan and Egypt and UAE and other more friendly nations in the region who are probably also tired of seeing this devastation in their backyard, right? So, yeah, I don't think the Palestinian people, unfortunately, I don't think they can self-govern at this point, right? This is the same group that they did elect Hamas. I don't think they're ready for self-governance. So I think there needs to be a group of trusted nations in that region taking over the region. I don't think it should be Israel taking military control of the region anymore. And then let's figure out some sort of reconstruction plan where those countries, as well as Israel, are pitching in on the reconstruction. Because that's what was discussed. Do you guys remember when Trump said he was going to turn Gaza into the Riviera of the Middle East? You know what happened after that? The Arab nations had a summit where they said that they were willing to put $20 billion, and then a month later, they said $50 billion toward a reconstruction project in Gaza. So, yes, finally, the Arab nations are willing to pitch in and help ameliorate the situation. Because, no, I don't think this is going to get resolved between Israel and Hamas by themselves. I think other countries need to get involved, unfortunately. But, like, let's start moving in the direction of that, as opposed to, well, Hamas needs to be defeated. Hamas can't be defeated this way because Hamas is an idea. And if you keep on bombing places, I know that Hamas has, they have some of their tunnels allegedly under schools and hospitals and all that, right? But the level of bombing and devastation goes well beyond just tunnel networks under civilian infrastructure. This is like a full-scale razing of the region. A full-scale, yes, ethnic cleansing. They're trying to remove these people from the region. And I understand, because at some point you get fed up and you're like, we can't work with these people. But we got to appeal to the better angel of our nature and believe, hey, these are still people and these can still be saved. Because after World War II, by the way, Western nations pushed in to de-radicalize Nazi Germany because they recognize, hey, well, we can't just like kill all the Germans. We can't remove all the Germans from the land. So we got to actually like educate and reform this culture. And we got to show them that we're the good guys. The people who were leading you before, those were not the good guys. We're the good guys. That's what needs to start happening here. Same thing to a lesser degree with the US and Japan. After the US dropped nukes on Japan and Japan's emperor surrendered, US caused what was called the economic miracle in Japan. That's why the Japanese don't hate America, because we helped them recover. Now, granted, I don't think they were so far gone as a lot of the Palestinian people are. A lot of the Palestinian people are just poorly educated. It's a third world country. A lot of them have just been given propaganda to genuinely hate Israel and hate Jews. But people can change. People can change, but they're definitely not going to change by prosecuting this way of dealing with Hamas. So we need something new here. Okay. This is the first time I'm reading my chat. We're going to see what people think. I just had to get this stuff off my chest. I'm sure that there were things in there. There's always like little minutia and details in there. What I want people to just zoom out and look at is like, hey, this is not about side A is better than side B. Okay, like I want people to just elevate beyond sides because this is exhausting. And I'm seeing this happen at every level of civilization. Men and women can't seem to get along. People of different religions can't seem to get along. People in different states. I mean, California hates Florida. Florida hates California. The Democrats hate the Republicans. Republicans hate Democrats. Men hate women. Trump hates Newsom. Newsom hates Trump. Now Trump is posting videos of showing Obama getting locked up and thrown in prison. It's like, this is insane. Like the core issue is disconnection, dehumanization. It's the core issue. And yes, it's popping up, obviously, in a very pronounced fashion in Gaza, but it goes well beyond Gaza, and it's about the human condition more generally. We've lost the ability to relate to one another as human beings. And it's shutting down the ability to even have constructive problem solving. And it has people saying things like someone said in my chat, oh, as if the Palestinian people will accept anything aside from Hamas. Of course they will. Of course they will. There are many Palestinian people who are literally protesting right now against Hamas, but they get killed by Hamas. A lot of dissidents get killed by Hamas. A lot of them see, hey, we don't like Hamas, but they get killed by Hamas. And then a lot of them, they look at what Israel's doing. It's like, well, I don't trust those guys either. So the enemy is my friend. So no, I'm not willing to buy into this defeatist narrative. No, these people won't accept anything else, because you know what that's saying? It's assuming bad faith. It's fundamentally a misanthropic view of humanity, because at the end of the day, we all want the same basic things. We all want physical safety. We all want food and water. We all want community. We all want love. We all want purpose. If you can manage to appeal to people's self-interest, you can change them. And yes, there's always going to be a 1 to 3% of the population who's psychopath and can't be changed. But we're not talking about 1 to 3% of the population. We're talking about 2 million people. There are definitely people in that population who can be changed. And we did it in Nazi Germany. So let's dare to believe that's possible here. Because what's the other solution? Killing them all. If you don't believe that people can change, the only solution is domination. So woe unto us if we give up on people. Okay, let's see more comments here. Hey, Mark caught me live. Glad you're here. We love your fake fireplace. Yes, you guys are here because of my fake fireplace, which changes colors, by the way. You guys want to see it change colors? I don't know if you guys have noticed. It's like a little Easter egg. But yeah, it changes colors. So every day I'm like, what mood am I feeling? I'm actually feeling pretty fiery today. So we're going to make it red. Is that cool? Yeah, we're just going to stick to red. This is taking way too long. All right, cool. Fiery Kaizen. Okay, what else we got? Thank you, Emma Cole. This is a nice comment. You explain the world in a way that I can understand. That allows me to take the knowledge you give and pass that on when I'm in conversation with others. I love to hear that. Thank you. That is giving me hope in humanity, faith in humanity. Thank you, Adam. This is a very nice comment as well. We're curious of your perspective. You have a unique take on these topics. We're unable to have simple discourse, and this good guys versus bad guys isn't helping us. It's refreshing to watch you. Yeah, it's like, seriously, it's like this very juvenile black and white view of the world where it's like there's nothing wrong with me and everything wrong with my opponent. It's ridiculous. The world has never been that way. It's never been that way. And there are times where it's very clear that one side is much more evil at that moment, making much more evil decisions than the other, like the Nazis, right? They're doing a lot of evil stuff, but there's just also this really interesting portrait. It's called Ordinary Men, actually. Let me pull it up for you guys. It's made a big impact on me when I learned about this. Wait, no, that's not it. I don't want to spoil it, but we're going to see if I can find it real quick. Damn, I can't find it. Okay, well, I'll just have to describe it for you guys, and you'll use your imagination. There's this really poignant painting from the mid 20th century, and it's just a bunch of men in a beautiful park with their families, and they're like having picnics, and there's dogs running around, and there's children playing. Then when you read the description of this painting, or might have even been a photo, you find out that those were Nazi soldiers. So it's like, whoa. When you think Nazi soldiers, you think of all the atrocities of the mid 20th century and all the things that were done to Jewish people and the terrible things of a Holocaust, right? But when you see that photo, it makes you realize, hey, these were people who had bad ideas in their head. They were bad ideas, but they were also people. So how did that happen? Is it something fundamentally flawed with these people? Is there some sort of genetic defect? No, they've been infected with bad ideas. It's like they're in a mass psychosis where they've been taught that these people, in this particular case, the Jews, are the cause of all our problems and we need to kill them. That was a thought that these Nazi soldiers had. But when you look at that photo, it's like, wow, these people were just people who had wives and had kids, and they thought they were doing the right thing. It's insane. Now, when you realize that these are people, you realize that people are susceptible to bad ideas, but they're also susceptible to good ideas. Positive ideas and respect for one's fellow man and compassion, these are also infectious ideas. I think we've just given up on them in large part as a civilization, unfortunately. And we view the way to deal with anyone who disagrees is just fire and brimstone and to completely destroy the opposition. And yes, look, the bottom line of civilization is violence, right? The reason we have civilization is so that we don't resolve things violently, because in a state of nature, that's how you resolve things, through violence. Okay, but the reason why we are able to make civilization happen, and the reason why rather than 30 to 50% of people dying from homicide, which used to be the case in prehistoric times, literally 30 to 50% of people in tribes would die from homicide. We now have in the United States 0.75% of people dying from violence. That's incredible. That's a marvelous achievement by humans. And it's because even though we have these demons of our nature, we also are able to appeal to the better angels of our nature. So it's important to realize, yes, people can change. And when there are mass movements that are extremist movements, they're just that, they're movements. Okay, it's something that moved people, and they can be moved in the opposite direction. And we can't give up on that. We must not give up on that, because the only alternative, again, is total oblivion, total domination of your opponent. And when everyone starts believing in that, then civilization itself crumbles. And that's what makes me concerned about stuff. Like, for instance, we're weaving in a whole bunch of stuff today, so just stick with me. The Luigi Mangione thing, where this kid decides to kill the United Healthcare CEO because that kid had just given up on the project of civil society. That's essentially what he said. He's like, hey, I don't believe in civil society's ability to solve problems. So instead, I'm going to use violence to solve my problems. I'm going to kill people to resolve disagreements. And people were clapping their hands, celebrating, still deifying this kid. And by the way, it's not over. By the way, I was listening to, there was an interesting episode of Tucker Carlson very recently, where he interviewed someone who's gone really deep on the Luigi Mangione case. And it looks like the case that actually proves that Luigi Mangione was a United Healthcare killer is actually pretty flimsy. So this kid actually might walk free. And, there's some theories that it's actually the kid he's not the one who killed the person. He was the fall guy, but he was a willing fall guy because he wanted to be a celebrity of some sort. I don't know, but regardless, like, if this kid walks free, it's going to be sending a message to millions of people that, yeah, violence is the way that you express dissent. Violence is the way that you resolve disagreement. And unless we are willing to take a stance that, no, violence is not the answer, we're going to keep on getting more violent solutions to problems. Oh, this is a great comment. What you are doing is the original ethos of X. Somewhere in the middle, seeking truth without bias from both sides. Thanks for saying that. You know, it's funny. I only started using X in November, I think, like October. I mean, I used it. I used Twitter. For those of you who don't know, piece of interesting lore. I used to be a video game commentator. So I used to work in the esports industry. I was actually a League of Legends commentator in like another lifetime. And I used Twitter then. I really hated Twitter then because League of Legends esports community, let me tell you, one of the most vicious, savage communities out there. A lot of unhappy people getting very passionate about games and being very mean to one another. I really disliked my experience with Twitter. I only used it for work. The moment I didn't have to use it for work anymore, I just stopped using it. Then it was only in about, I don't know, right before the election, maybe like September, October. I was like, you know what? My stuff is doing well on Instagram. What if I just cross-post it to X? So I'd cross-post it to X. And then when Elon started retweeting me, that's when I started paying more attention to X because, you know, how am I not going to do that? Most influential man in the world is going to be retweeting me. Of course, I'm going to pay attention to X. But yeah, I just find it's even going on X and looking at my phone, it becomes exhausting recently because people are just so polarized. Like it's just people typing in all caps and calling each other names and calling each other retards for disagreement. It's like, what is this? The way people talk on X, if people talk like that in real life, it would come to blows real quick. It would get violent real quick. And I'm glad that people are honest, but Jesus Christ, you don't just use honesty to get through life. You also need to have empathy. You need both. You need truth and you need empathy. Because if you're giving truth unempathetically, then what's going to happen is you're going to get to blows real quick because it's over aggression. And if you have empathy without truth, you're going to have confusion and you're going to have toxic empathy. So you need both. And it seems like people don't seem to realize that. They think that if that person is my enemy, anything I say against my enemy is justified because they're my enemy. It's absurd. It's absurd. We got to grow up as a civilization. Will I review the recent Jubilee video? I'm not sure what video you're talking about. Is it the thing with, I think it was a episode of Surrounded with Mehdi Hassan? It's like versus a bunch of far right people. I don't know. If people in the chat really want me to review it, maybe I will, but I wasn't particularly interested in it. Yeah, this is real. True says, I want to say most of my family just reads headlines and don't even read the articles. Did you hear insert headline? It's true. I don't blame them, by the way. I mean, even me, the only reason I'm able to pull some facts and like am more erudite than the average person is because I just spent a lot of time reading about this stuff and a lot of time using AI. I'm gonna be straight up with you guys. I don't read a lot of articles. It's hard to read through the whole article because, first of all, it used to be that if you assumed you're getting the truth from the New York Times, you would read the whole article because, yeah, I'm assuming that I'm getting the truth, so it's worth me investing 10 minutes to read this thing and understand it. But when you can't even trust any individual source of information, it's hard to justify investing that much time. We all have a shorter attention span because we're constantly moving toward this dopamine addicted short form society where we want everything within seconds. So yeah, people just read headlines and it's much easier for us to just confirm our bias rather than confirm what the truth is. So you say your family does this. Yeah, everyone does this. I do this. But, you know, I also try to make sure that I'm comparing different articles and I try to read at least one article from each side if I'm going to opine on something. But it's really difficult. And we've created a world where we have a deficit of attention, but a deluge of information. Difficult problem to solve. And I think it wouldn't be as much of an issue if our confidence in our beliefs was proportional to how much we know about it. Right? Like it would normally, like when you go to a doctor, you might have some inclinations about what, I don't know, what are good health practices, but you would assume that the doctor who is a PhD and went through residency knows more than you. So you might have a disagreement, but you're probably not going to fight to the death over your disagreement with your doctor. But these days, we all know so little, but we're so overconfident. So we have an inverse proportion, an inverse relationship between how much we know and how confident we are in what we know. The solution to this is intellectual humility. It's like, let's just be humble enough to recognize none of us has the whole truth. It's very difficult to have the whole truth. I don't know. I have the whole truth about what's going on in Israel and Palestine and Gaza. I'm just reading a bunch of articles and trying to see what the common, what facts the various sources agree on, what facts they disagree on, and trying to tell you what things seems to be base truth versus things that based on narrative. But it's very difficult for us to know. So yeah, I think just being honest, like, yeah, most of us are just reading headlines. So at least if we can start there, rather than pretending that any of us is entitled as exclusive gatekeepers of truth, we can actually get somewhere here. Yes, this is a good point here. Russ Dixon. Don't forget, there were massive political protests by Israelis against their government prior to October 7th. Yeah, because remember, Israel's a democracy, right? Just like here, we have plenty of people who are pro-Trump and plenty of people who are against Trump. It's the same thing in Israel. There are plenty of people who actually, there was a poll in, I think it was May, where only 51% of people were supportive of continued military operations in Gaza. So it just shows you sometimes the support for this stuff is razor thin. And we want to make sure that we don't conflate the people with the government. The government's an extension of the people and in part a reflection of the people, but it's not a complete reflection. So that's a good note. And part of the concern is that sometimes politicians have strong incentives to keep conflict going. One of my concerns with Netanyahu is, frankly, I don't know that he has incentives to actually stop conflicts, because when you're in the middle of a conflict, it's much easier to gain support, because in times of peace, people are fighting within your country, but in times of war, you're fighting against another country. So there's less scrutiny on you. You want to know which president has had the highest approval ratings of the last 30 years in the United States? Take a wild guess. Who had the highest approval rating? Wasn't Trump. Probably guessed that. Not Biden. Not Obama. Not Clinton. It was George Bush. Immediately after 9/11, George Bush had the highest approval rating in recent history. Why? Especially given that a lot of people think George Bush was a terrible president in hindsight, because we had a common enemy. Because when Al-Qaeda took down the Twin Towers, the focus moved from internal division and right versus left to defeating the opponent. So my concern is that what's going on in this Israel-Palestine situation is the current government in Israel doesn't even have strong incentives to stop conflict. So you follow incentives. Okay. I'm going to keep going through these comments and see if there's anything else worth addressing here. Okay, so here, you know what? We'll address this one. So I don't like. Okay, you know what? I think it's a fair question. He says, why are you not talking about Egypt refusing since the beginning of the war to allow Gazan civilians to seek temporary refuge a few miles away in northern Sinai? So I'm going to answer that, but I want to talk about like good faith versus bad faith questions. And I was like, okay, maybe this is a good faith question, but then you say, you type in all caps and you say that's a bullshit excuse. Every other war has refugees. If you want to save civilian lives, you should do it. It's like, okay, you could just engage me with curiosity and say, okay, well, what do you make of the fact that Egypt has refused to allow refugees into their soil? Not like, why are you not talking about it in an accusatory way? It's like, I don't know, there's a million things I can talk about. We can talk about the entire history of the founding of Israel since 1947. Then we can talk about the 6-Day War. And we can talk about, there's so many things we can talk about. Like, yeah, so why am I not talking about this? Because it didn't occur to me to talk about it. But yeah, let's talk about that. Yeah, I don't think the other Arab nations have done their part to try to bring peace in the region. I don't think Egypt has done their part to try to bring peace in the region. I think a lot of them have said, oh, well, we don't like what's happening to the Palestinian people, but they haven't actually put any skin in the game. And I think also a lot of them look at it in the situation and they say, well, we have our own problems. Because guess what? Egypt, they already have Palestinian refugees in their country. And Egypt has tons of problems. It's not a particularly stable nation right now. Very poor and has a lot of instability problems. So it's like, there's like a collective action problem here too, where a lot of the neighbors prior until this year, and there's now more signs that they're willing to get involved, but prior to now, they're just not interested in being involved because they say, yeah, well, we don't like what Israel's doing to the Palestinians, but the Palestinians are not our people. So, like, why are we going to devote resources to solve a problem that's not ours? But as this thing continues to metastasize, and we haven't even talked about the whole Iran elements of it because Iran has been funding Hamas and funding Hezbollah and being an agitator in the region. But as this issue starts to metastasize, I think now finally the Arab nations are realizing, okay, this can't be solved by just Israel and Hamas, and we don't want it to be just the US calling the shots in our backyard. So now we need to get involved too. And sorry, no, I'm not willing to just say, oh, it's called propaganda. Guess what? Everyone spreads propaganda. Everyone. Fox News spreads propaganda. New York Times spreads propaganda. MSNBC spreads propaganda. NPR spreads propaganda. CNN spreads propaganda. I spread propaganda. You spread propaganda. You know what propaganda is? It's information that has bias in it. That's all propaganda is. All humans have bias. And I really hate it when people say, oh, well, that's propaganda, acting as if they haven't been subject to any propaganda in their own mind. We need to stop using labels and we need to start being specific. What is specifically incorrect about this headline? This is what pisses me off about the current state of discourse. Earlier in the stream, I mentioned this headline. I'll show you guys again. Let's find it one more time. All right, here we go. You guys see it? Wait, is that it? No, that's not it. We're gonna try sharing this again. Sorry, guys, this is so janky, but you know, it's just me out here. I want to show you like how not to have a discourse. Okay. So there's a headline from New York Times. The moment you see any headline, I don't care who it's from, you should have a baseline level of skepticism, even if it's a headline you agree with. So you see a headline from New York Times, breaking news, Israeli troops killed more than 60 Palestinians after crowds gathered near a border crossing where aid trucks entered, Gaza officials said. Okay, cool. I'm not just going to take it for granted that because New York Times says it's true, because I recognize everyone has bias. The whole world is propaganda. But this is not an argument. This comment here, still peddling without question or corroboration the Hamas narrative. Hashtag journalism. This is not a useful contribution to the dialogue. If there's something incorrect about what New York Times is saying, then the thing to do is name precisely what is incorrect. Or if you want to say, hey, Gaza officials are not a reliable source of information, you need to say, okay, well, if Israeli troops are saying, hey, we did open fire, and Gaza officials are saying people died, and Israeli information is not denying that people died, well, it is highly likely that some number of people died. So even in propaganda, there can be a kernel of truth. And sometimes that kernel is a lot bigger than a kernel. It's a whole bushel of truth. So saying just these words, these labels don't mean anything anymore. Let's stop calling stuff propaganda and let's say this part of the headline is true, this part of the headline is false. But what people like to do is, well, this goes against my narrative, so it's propaganda. You have propaganda too. I have propaganda too. That's not a good argument. Good arguments are based on specificity and they have confidence intervals and they're probabilistic, not binary. So I don't see an article from the New York Times and say, oh, the whole article is false because it's from New York Times. I say, okay, New York Times has a liberal bent. They are probably more sympathetic to Palestinians. Let me make sure that as I read this full article, I filter out this information and I try to read a source that disagrees with them, reporting on the same thing. And I try to see what these two sources agree on versus disagree on. That's a proper way to have a conversation, not by name calling. Okay. All right. Okay. Next topic. We've talked a lot about this. So let's talk about the Tulsi Gabbard situation. So this happened over the weekend, and it's continuing to pop off today because Tulsi Gabbard, who's our director of national intelligence, has accused the Obama administration of treasonous conspiracy, which is quite a claim because treason, of course, is a high crime. Now, here's what Tulsi Gabbard's core claim is. Tulsi is articulating, based on her statements on X and declassified documents her office release, that the intelligence community, which I'm going to abbreviate as IC just to keep things really simple, before Trump was elected in 2016, was releasing reports saying that Russia was probably not trying to influence the 2016 election through cyber attacks. But then after Trump got elected, they released a report in January 2017 asserting that Russia intervened to help Trump win. And much of that report was based on the Steele dossier, which is a report that was, it turns out, was funded by the Hillary Clinton campaign that allegedly tied Trump to Putin, which is where the Russia hoax came from. Now, here's the evidence that Gabbard cites as evidence of treason and conspiracy. So she pointed to 100 pages of emails and memos, including a specific memo to the director of national intelligence at the time, James Clapper, that stated, foreign adversaries did not use cyber attacks on election infrastructure to alter the US presidential election outcome. So basically, at one point they were saying, no, there wasn't Russian interference here. And that was the intelligence community consensus before the election. But after the election, after Trump won, the narrative changed to accuse Russia of aiding Trump without sufficient new evidence. And Gabbard specifically highlights the Steele dossier's role and calls it manufactured intelligence used to bolster the Russia collusion narrative. So she goes a step further than that. She says that that shift was prompted by Obama's request for a new assessment after the election, after a national security meeting. And she claims that Obama's request was politically motivated to undermine Trump's legitimacy. And that's what leads her to call this a treasonous conspiracy and saying that Obama-era officials like Clapper and Brennan and Comey deliberately pushed a false narrative and relied on the unverified Steele dossier. So here are some facts that are not in dispute. So it's intelligence community consensus that Russia did interfere in the 2016 election. It's not seriously disputed anymore. And that comes from bipartisan Senate reports that yes, there was Russian disinformation. Yes, there were hacking efforts. The real debate is how that interference was actually interpreted and politicized. And now we're going to pontificate. In my view, obviously the Obama administration and the liberal establishment had a clear bias against Trump. And I think it's clear that they may have emphasized the most damaging interpretation of Russia's actions as being intentionally designed to get Trump in office. But that said, in my opinion, that is not the same thing as fabricating a conspiracy. Now, I haven't read through the 100 emails. I haven't read the 100 documents that Tulsi Gabbard points to as evidence of this being fabricated. But there's a big difference between saying, hey, look, the narrative changed after Trump got into office, and a biased political establishment focus on facts that support their argument that Trump was supported by the Russian disinformation campaign. There's a big difference between that and knowingly manufacturing fake information that is a lie when you know it's a lie. It's not the same thing. And we have to remember the sequence of events here, because the Steele dossier was later discredited. But at the time that it was being circulated, many people didn't know how shaky it was. Now, the FBI didn't launch its Trump-Russia investigation because of just the dossier, right? It started with comments from an Australian diplomat even before that. And there were clearly serious problems with how the investigation was handled. And I do think that the Department of Justice was used in lawfare against Trump. That said, again, there's a difference between saying someone was treasonous because treason means giving aid to enemies or waging war against the U.S. And I didn't see, at least in Tulsi Gabbard's public comments on Fox News or in her statements on X, that there's evidence of that, of aiding enemies or engaging in war. But I do see plenty of evidence that there was strong motive for the Obama administration to selectively focus on facts that would discredit Trump's election while ignoring prior testimony from the intelligence community that said that there wasn't a significant degree of Russian interference on Trump's behalf. Do you guys see the needle I'm trying to thread here? So yeah, the bias is a real problem and it deserves scrutiny. And clearly we were under a nearly authoritarian regime that was censoring the Hunter Biden laptop story because they considered it problematic, and censoring COVID disinformation because they considered it problematic, and a lot of stuff ended up being true. And not even just censor, but did this almost soft censorship of improper thought by trying to demonize people as conspiracy theorists for recommending vitamin D or hydroxychloroquine during COVID, or just like there was so much social manipulation going on. That's not the same thing as proving that the Trump administration or the Obama administration conspired to frame Trump or committed treason. So that's a standard that needs to be reached in court. I'm actually not clear if Tulsi Gabbard is just releasing these documents or she's saying that they're actually going to bring this to court. Personally, I'm not particularly interested in these claims unless they're actually going to throw people in prison. If they actually have strong evidence of treason, then they should put their money where their mouth is. And I want to see people actually go to prison. And if people actually go to prison and Tulsi made a strong enough case, great, glad justice is being served. But I didn't see anything in her at least public statements that made me convinced that there was some Obama ordered conspiracy to obstruct Trump's presidency. It seemed more like they got new evidence in the Steele dossier. It turns out that in hindsight, that evidence was not reliable evidence, and they used that evidence without appropriate skepticism of that evidence to justify their claims. So that's what happened. Those are my thoughts on it. Again, this is a developing situation. So maybe once people have gone through the 100 emails, I'm not going to go through the 100 emails, sorry. We can find very substantive proof. Just based on what Tulsi Gabbard has presented to the public and highlighted, I'm not very convinced that there was some intentional criminal conspiracy by the Obama administration. And certainly I don't think he's going to go to prison. And I certainly don't want this to overshadow the Epstein stuff, by the way. I know some people have speculated that all of this is designed to overshadow the Epstein kerfuffle, debacle, whatever you want to call it. I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to speculate malintent by Tulsi Gabbard. She seems like an honest woman. And I imagine she's been working on this case for a while now. It's not something that she just came up with in the week and a half since the Epstein discussion and the Epstein saga evolved. But regardless of whether it's designed to overshadow the Epstein situation or not, I want the Epstein situation to be the focus, because to me, that is a much bigger concern than whether the Obama administration put out a biased interpretation of the data that suggested that Trump was colluding with Russia. I think that's a problem too. I'm not saying these things can't be prosecuted at the same time, because they can. But I would encourage people to be skeptical of this rather than just fall victim to confirmation bias, because it's one thing to say that the Obama administration, I know some people believe that they ruined the country or that they caused even more racial division. It's one thing to believe that. It's another thing entirely to accuse them of treasonous conspiracy. Okay, that's it. Andrea Turner, thank you. This is a really nice comment. I think this is what I'm going to close out the stream with. Just wanted to send some encouragement. For my part, what you're doing really matters and has helped me. Sorry you're feeling exhausted. I completely understand that. Peace and blessings. Peace and blessings to you too, Andrea Turner. I think, comments like this help remind me that it's not just a bunch of numbers on a screen here. Talking about this stuff, even if I'm not 100% accurate, even if people disagree, it is important, because like the most important thing is that we just try to think Just try to think through all the possibilities, try to understand the arguments and the counter arguments. That's the most important thing. Because look, politicians are not going to solve the problem. The media is not going to solve the problem. The politicians are meeting the demand of the people. They're just supplying our demand. So if we have demand for biased storytelling, for name calling, for division, for all or nothing thinking, for constant emotional hijacking, for outrage culture, if that's the demand that the populace has, politicians and media will always be lining up to meet that demand, and we will continue to elect them because they're meeting our demand. So it's just all an inside game, guys. Like, we can't keep pointing the finger outside and expecting things to change. We have to change. We have to change. We got to change how we resolve conflict. We got to check our own biases. We got to be humble enough to recognize that we don't have all of the truth individually. We got to recognize that, hey, we're all confused. We got to recognize that we all get emotional and misled sometimes. We got to recognize that we all spread propaganda. We got to recognize that we all consume propaganda. Like, we got to take personal responsibility. And if we do that, we're going to have a great time. And this is still the best time ever to be a human being. So despite my impassioned rants about how frustrated I am with modern political discourse, still the best time ever. I still love living in America. I would still rather live in America than anywhere else in the world. And yeah, we really have something beautiful here. It's something precious that's worth preserving. I just worry that sometimes we don't realize that. And we regress to our baser instincts, and we're more focused on the fight than the collective project of civilization. So that's all for today, everyone. I'm going to take a walk after this. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again on Wednesday for another episode of Nuanced at 1 p.m. Pacific. Until then, take care of one another, be good to one another, and be the change that you want to see in the world. Bye-bye.